our, if you want to call it a mantra, really was that the worst shot in the new movie has to be as good as the best shot in the last movie, because there's always a worse shot. And the challenge, of course, is that not only has Spider-Man raised the bar over the course of the intervening years, but other movies have come out which have been incredibly successful and had some beautiful and spectacular technical breakthroughs. The challenge for us is that we have a moving target, and not only is it a moving target, we have to project into the future how high the bar is going to be. It isn't just about a bar that's sitting here today. It's about a bar that's going to be a certain height when we release this film. Well, we started where we left off in the first film, which is daunting, because I think we were really successful with the things that happened in the first film, both visually and storytelling-wise. We had a new villain, a very good villain, I think a very challenging villain, and we also had to show our character in the flesh.
Doing the data or the photo acquisitions that we did on Tobey Maguire and Alfred Molina both had to happen very early on. Building those two characters for the movie they're two hero characters for the film, and to be able to do the shots for the movie, we need to start by building the characters and having them ready to put into shots. So it was probably one of the first development efforts that we had to embark on.
John worked with Tobey Maguire, I worked with Alfred Molina, and we essentially directed them in facial performances of different ranges of emotion with motion capture.
We measured every inch of their body, we cyber scanned every inch of them from head to toe. We did a lot of motion capture on their movements, facial expressions, how they open and close their eyes, how they smile, how they frown, pretty much all of the range of emotions that we could get. We had them read lines from the script so we could capture performance of how they might say different lines of dialogue. Pretty much anything that we could capture in terms of photographic elements or data elements through motion capture, we did.
And then we took that data and applied that to the CG model, so that every time you see them in a fight sequence, if you stop and you go through slowly, you'll see all these different facial expressions on the characters. The shot that's probably has to be, the proof in the pudding is the one at the end when they're in the pier and Doc Ock pulls down the fusion machine and the Crescent's down into the water and essentially drowns himself. The camera has him, he's full screen, and he's all CG, everything in the shot is CG, and he drifts away down into blackness ultimately.
We had discussed the potential of having Alfred do this underwater fall away, okay? It became cumbersome at best. So we decided to make the character into a computer-generated character. And that was one of our big challenges in the making of this movie. This is a close-up. We have to actually make believable Alfred Molina, Doc Ock, in the flesh, in this close, at the beginning of the shot, and take him away from camera. And add to that, he's got to be underwater, which is kind of a unique deal.
Doctor, we have a successful fusion reaction.
For the fusion device, we knew it had to be a strong visual image that conveyed a lot of energy and a lot of potential energy. And there's a line in the story where Alfred says, "I've got the power of the sun in the palm of my hand." And we used that as a springboard for our inspiration. What we did is we looked for a lot of reference photography of the sun. And what we found is that when people photograph the sun, you get these fascinating images that are really not blown out like we traditionally see the sun, but show a lot of the detail of the gases on the surface of the sun. And so we used those as a guide and ended up building up from the surface and out to the gas prominences.
Well, they're going to do shot 74, which is this wall here imploding into Ox Machine.
This particular miniature shot is complex in that we have a number of practical effects that are working with the miniature photography as well. And since you're on a small scale, this is all done in quarter scale. And because it's so small, everything has to be in a very condensed area.
What you can't tell by looking at the model out there on the water is that it's actually up on a steel platform supported from below the water level. And so during the shot, the building's going to sink down some, and the walls are going to, Ox Machine inside is going to lash out, and the energy slice through the building, and then the building will suck in.
This is a shot and really the whole sequence which combines both miniature photography and CG work. So they're not separate of each other, they're combined. And really one of the arts in visual effects now is understanding photographic means and computer means and how to blend them together, and that's really the best way to get the most dramatic effects.
It was decided that there was going to be an elevated train sequence in this movie, and of course there's no elevated train in contemporary Manhattan.
Initially, I think the train sequence was probably the most daunting because it was the most fleshed out in the script, and it was easy to see and to be able to read between the lines early on that there was going to be a lot of CGI work involved. The train sequence was one that immediately jumped out at everybody as something that was very large that we may not have enough time to finish if we didn't start on it right away.
It became clear early on in the design of the train sequence that we were going to need a lot more than just plates from New York with trains added. We decided the quantity of work dictated that we should probably shoot some real trains somewhere. And research brought us to the Loop in Chicago, which has contemporary high-rise buildings, which has an elevated train, and it's not altogether that different than the kinds of cars that would have or could have run on tracks for an elevated train in Manhattan.
We got on board really early just trying to plan the logistics of that and trying to determine how one might take Chicago footage, blend it with New York footage, blend it with CGI, buildings and atmosphere and street elements and that sort of thing to put together a scene that played as if it was shot in New York, or was taking place entirely in New York.
So we went to Chicago, and it did a lot of things for us. One is it gave us incredibly good reference for railroad tracks, what the trains looked like, how they moved, all of the things that we need to have to create those same items from scratch. But we put 16 cameras on a railroad car, and that was our train. We drove it around the Loop. There were other trains on the Loop. We had our own conductor and everything, and we drove this elevated train bristling cameras around and around and around. Those plates became backgrounds for running shots where there's images outside the windows, images across the top of the car where the camera has limited motion. We did a spider cam shot using a real Chicago train, a real stretch of Chicago street, where the camera starts out close on the characters and pulls back to reveal the train pulling away. So we got as much of the material as we felt could be gotten in the Chicago environment, and that kept us from having to create all those buildings and all those trains and all those tracks for those shots.
The train sequence is fairly difficult because you're always trying to get the right direction, get a good plate that matches. Sometimes it's a completely CG shot, but wherever you can, you use a real train, that was set on rockers and different things that the mechanical effects guys would put together to make the train shake like a real train.
There's lots of stuff in the train sequence where there's combinations of CGI characters with live action train. Some cases there's live action characters shot blue screen on top of CGI train with a live background or a CGI background. So it's like a giant mix and match.
Certainly when they're fighting on the side of the train, that was difficult in the sense of trying to have laws of physics of gravity apply to them. Even if their feet can stick, they're going to be affected by gravity. And this shot definitely involved a lot of trying to get the exact right feel of how gravity would affect that. The right strength and look in the tentacles and everything else it's a big job. It's a big job. It was one of the more difficult sequences.
We knew we had to have a convincing CG version of Alfred Molina as Doc Ock, so the first thing we started with was the tentacles. And we worked with the company Edge Effects, who was building the practical puppeteer tentacle, and we took their model and scanned it and looked closely at what was going on with the shading and surface textures of the real model. We replicated that in CG.
Certainly, the tentacles themselves presented a problem because I think they're unique, and I don't think that there's anything in nature. There are things maybe close, but nothing really substantial to give some sort of reference to go off of.
Every shot that had tentacles in was a decision about whether to use puppets or to use an animated tentacle. What we did was, on the day while we were shooting, if it was a shot we thought we could do puppets, we'd try it, we'd go for it. We'd put him in there, hook Doc Ock up to a harness, which was pretty heavy, have him go through his actions, and if it worked, it was great, we got it in the can, we moved on. In some cases we said, hey, it's going to take too long to set up, let's get a CG version. The other thing, there were some shots were just from the get-go we knew had to be CG. Biggest lesson I think we learned on Spider-Man 2 was just to be prepared to recreate a lot of different environments and a lot of performances later.
I guess basically that you can never have enough preparation. I mean, the terrible thing is that the work always expands to fill the time given to do something. But what I've learned is, with the riches of being able to do anything, one of the things that you have to do is you have to be real specific about what you want to do. Because if you're not careful, you can execute a bunch of mediocre stuff, and you can do it really quickly, and lots of it, right? So what you really have to do is pick out those moments where you can craft something, so it sets itself apart. That's the kind of stuff that you need to focus on. That's what I learned was, that's where I want to focus, on creating those moments.